International aid finally reaches Libya's flood-ravaged city of Derna, but concerns grow for survivors struggling to access clean water. The British actor and comedian Russell Brand is accused of rape and sexual assaults. He denies the claims. And protesters around the world mark 1 year since a young Iranian woman died in police custody. Protests are being held in Iran and across the world to mark 1 year since the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman who died in police custody. Amini was arrested for allegedly violating Iran's strict rules requiring women to cover their hair with a hijab or headscarf. A UN human rights expert said that the evidence established that she died, quote, as a result of beatings by the morality police. Iran's state coroner said that her death was a result of pre-existing medical conditions. Now, Amini's death sparked mass protests across the country, with women ripping off their headscarves and cutting their hair in solidarity. Demands ranged from a call for more freedoms to overthrowing the regime. Well, authorities have not released an official death toll from the crackdown, but social media, activists and human rights groups have helped to give a picture of what is happening on the ground. And a Western diplomat in Tehran estimates that about 20% of women are now breaking the laws of the Islamic Republic across the country by going outside without a head covering, and that at least 20,000 Iranians have been arrested with reports of torture and rape while in police custody. Human rights groups claim that the regime has killed more than 500 people. Well, turning to Ukraine now, and 2 civilian cargo ships have become the first to safely navigate a maritime corridor to reach one of the country's Black Sea ports. The 2 ships have docked in Chornomorsk and are expected to load almost 20,000 tons of wheat destined for Africa and Asia. The United Nations and other groups have warned that the Russian blockade could drive up global grain prices, putting millions of the world's poorest at risk of malnutrition or even starvation. Now, Ukrainian naval ships have been defending the corridor since August after Russia said that it would once again treat all ships sailing to the country as potential military targets. Videos which show Ukrainian soldiers retaking the village.
Andriivka is tiny, barely more than a hamlet, but its recapture is being hailed here as something of a breakthrough. And a dramatic series of videos released by the Ukrainian military shows how it all ended. In the first, we see Ukrainian troops making their careful, nervous way into the village. It's an apocalyptic wasteland, like something out of World War I. Not a building, not a tree left intact. These pictures all come from the same Ukrainian unit, the 3rd Assault Brigade. They were all filmed within the last couple of days. After weeks of ferocious fighting, the Ukrainians know the village is about to fall. By now, the Russians holding Andriivka are surrounded. In this video, we see a drone being used to broadcast a recorded message to those Russian soldiers still holding out. Surrender now.
На раздумье мы даем вам 10 минут. У меня все. Надеюсь на ваше благоразумие.
Eventually, with several of their commanders dead and their situation hopeless, Russian soldiers emerge from the wreckage and give themselves up. But this is what's left of Andriivka. There's basically nothing there. It's hard to imagine anyone ever living here again. A tiny, shattered place, perhaps, but Ukraine says the recapture of Andriivka is important. It brings Kiev a little bit closer to the retaking of Bakhmut. It's a slow, destructive process with no guarantee of success.
The United Auto Workers Union resumed, quote, reasonably productive talks with 3 of the United States' largest car manufacturers. And more than 12,000 workers are participating in the strikes that began shortly after midnight on Friday. The union is targeting plants owned by General Motors, Ford and Stellantis. And President Biden has sent 2 officials to Detroit, Michigan, to assist with the negotiations. Now, until a deal is made, targeted strikes are taking place at a General Motors assembly facility in Wentzville, Missouri, a Ford Motor assembly plant in Wayne, Michigan, and an assembly complex in Toledo, Ohio. Impeached Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton was acquitted by the Texas Senate on 16 impeachment articles relating to allegations of corruption.
Attorney General Warren Kenneth Paxton Jr. is hereby, at this moment, reinstated to office.
Well, despite the Texas House overwhelmingly supporting impeachment, Paxton's Republican colleagues in the Senate voted against removing him from office. Mr. Paxton was reinstated as Attorney General once the vote concluded. Because 60 years ago, this past Friday, 4 black girls were killed in an attack on a Birmingham, Alabama church by 4 members of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, the massive explosion claimed the lives of 11-year-old Denise McNair, along with 14-year-olds Carol Robertson, Addie Mae Collins and Cynthia Diane Wesley. It also injured nearly 24 others inside the church as they prepared to attend Sunday services. The FBI called the 1965 bombing a clear act of racial hatred and a most heinous offence. Well, on Friday, survivors, victims' family members, as well as the first black woman appointed to the US Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, gathered at the rebuilt 16th Street Baptist Church to remember the girls and the events of September 15th, 1963.
Now, I'd be remiss if I did not take a moment to acknowledge at the outset those present now who were also in this church 60 years ago today at the scene of the tragic event that has brought us together. To the survivors and the victims, I cannot imagine the strength that it must take to keep coming back here after what you have endured. May we all learn from your commitment to this cause and for the grace that you have repeatedly shown, even in your long-standing grief.